Hi everyone, it's March 2nd, and I hope you're having a great day. We're on day 2 of our 40-day initiative, our embarkment on 40 days of Messiah miracle moments toward Easter. And once again, we can share these together through hashtag Messiah miracle moments, hashtag Messiah miracle moments. And you are welcome to share my stories on your site if you'd like, or to tag me in yours as well. And the idea is that I kind of imagine today like a puzzle. We are creating this mosaic by bringing all of our own pieces of the puzzle together. So by Easter, we can just look at the beautiful tapestry that we're creating together. And it won't be finished because, God's never going to be done making miracles, and no different than I think it's easy for people to think, well, in the Bible there were signs and miracles, and God's not necessarily still doing that, but He absolutely is. And I think you're going to be surprised. And I'm already kind of amazed what I've heard, not necessarily on my site yet, but as other people have been sharing Holy Spirit moments that they have experienced that are in a supernatural in nature, if you will. That are just reminding us and comforting us of the Holy Spirit's presence, and how thin the veil is between earth and heaven, and the promises that God has He keeps His promises, and the beautiful things that He has in store for us. So I know this place is painful. I know it's sometimes really hard, but just know it is momentary. And let's be faithful together and be encouraging of one another. So today's day 2, today's miracle moment from the Messiah is very simply, well, it's not very simply. I'm actually going to have to give you a little bit of history, but it's going to start from my birth. So we're going to go back in time to 1966. I was actually born a year later, and my birthday's tomorrow. So it was almost 57 years or 56 years ago tomorrow. I'm just going to turn that off because that's a little bit noisy. So again, this is organic, this is real, this isn't staged, because I want you to just feel like this can be duplicatable. Just pick up your phone and share, because it really is about the stories and how the Holy Spirit has moved in your life and shared, and God has shown up. So please be courageous and do that. So when I was born in 1967, I came into a situation where there would become lots of trauma in a very short period of time, in 5 years. So between 1966 and 1970, there was a tremendous amount of trauma. We're gonna begin with my mother's father. He came over from Germany, and boy, that's a whole nother story all by itself. He was on Teddy Roosevelt's ship, and I guess he had a really personal relationship with Teddy Roosevelt. So Teddy Roosevelt, blah, blah, blah. It's getting late and I'm tongue-tied. And when he had fulfilled his service in the Navy, he actually, when he was immigrated, he was a child. His older sisters had gone ahead of him, and his aunt and family raised them here in the United States. So his aunt ended up becoming ill, and he was going to leave the military. He'd served his terms. Teddy Roosevelt apparently said, please stay on the ship. But my grandpa said, I need to be honorable and go back and take care of the woman who took care of my sisters and I, and raised us here in the United States. So 80 years later, or when he was in his 80s, I should say, he meanwhile had a farm with my great grandma, where my grandma and even my mom was raised during that time. And so he was still homesteading in his 80s, living on his own. So it was long about 1966 that he basically told family members that he said he knew he was getting ill and he wasn't doing well, but again was independent and still going out to the barn and milking cows and doing all of that. And he told my grandma, he said, she said, I'll see you tomorrow. And he goes, you will, but I won't see you. And it was his way of saying, I love you, but I'm going to pass away tomorrow and I'm not going to be here. So nobody knows exactly how that all happened, but he clearly knew he was not going to be around after the next day. So when he passed away, that was quite traumatic and just beloved. My mother, that was her grandpa, and my grandma's, that was her father. And it was the beginning of loss. So a year before that, my mom and my dad had given birth to their first child, a son, my brother Matthew. And Matthew sadly was born without enough oxygen at birth. And he suffered brain damage. He had seizures. He couldn't talk. He didn't have the use of his limbs. But I heard that he was just a ray of sunshine. And pictures of he and I, because he lived to be 3 and I was 1. So we had a year together here. Look forward to seeing him again in heaven. But just the giggling and the laughter and the gift of his life in that short period of time has been profoundly shared over and over again. But that was the passing of somebody, and that was number 2 in that 5 years. My mother had an only brother, and he was younger than she. He was married, and he and his wife had a 6-week-old baby, and his wife also had his her sister, younger sister, about 12 years old. They had all gone to Wisconsin on a trip. I think they were visiting her side of the family, and they returned to Missouri, where I am from. And the story is that they only got 5 miles from home, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and all 4 of them were instantly killed. They went off a bridge where there was train tracks. So now the trauma is mounting. We've lost 5 people in just a couple years. But the good news is the miracle moment that I'm sharing today is a mother's premonition. Across the street from my parents, and by the way, my grandma and grandpa, my mom's mom, and my parents, and then another family, we all lived just a block or so apart. So I was so fortunate in the first 10 years of my life that I lived only a couple blocks from just around the corner from my grandma and grandpa. And during that time, my grandma was always like, well, they had a big family, lots of kids, like an extended family, not my grandparents, but their siblings. My grandma was an only child. My grandpa had 11 brothers and sisters. So that was part of what drew my grandma to my grandpa's family, is just all of the extended family and the love that was shared. There's a family across the street as well from my grandma and grandpa, and again, just down the street from where I lived at that time. And so Granny and Granddad was how I always affectionately knew them. They had a son named Donnie, who was the same age as my grandma and grandpa's only son, my mother's only brother, who passed away in his family, and his name was Ronnie. So it was Ronnie and Donnie, same age, and those boys knew each other well. They got married around the same time. Donnie actually and my Aunt Betty, who he married, had a couple little girls, Cindy and Sherry, and I grew up with Cindy and Sherry as if they were my first cousins. They were so close, again, probably because my first cousin passed away when she was only 6 weeks old. And part of it, too, is that my Aunt Betty was fostered and never adopted. It was a very sad and abusive situation. So when she married my Uncle Donnie, as we affectionately, again, not blood relative, but as a child, I didn't know the difference. I think because of her lack of love and support, and out of the need to survive, I think my grandparents just kind of adopted her to kind of fill that gaping hole of loss that they had. So the families were very close. My grandma actually said to my Aunt Betty and my mom and my dad at that time, you girls get busy because I've got 3 granddaughters and I need some grandsons. And sure enough, 9 months later, my Aunt Betty and my mom gave birth to 2 boys 5 days apart. So my brother and my cousin, Donnie Jr., are very close. So I don't know the details of the story with Granny, who again was the mother to Donnie, but she apparently had a premonition about what was about to happen when my Uncle Donnie, his wife, their 6-week-old baby, and his wife's younger sister all died in that car accident. And so now we're into 1970. This is again kind of wrapping up that 5 years. And my grandma actually had a really bad premonition. This was after my Uncle Donnie passed away, but it was about water, and it was Memorial Weekend, and it was so profound that she talked my mom and my dad out of going to a gathering over Memorial Weekend that involved water. It was a lake or pool. I think it was probably at a lake, but it was on that day that my Uncle Donnie, my Aunt Betty's husband, they were all on a boat. Aunt Betty was pregnant, and my cousins Cindy and Sherry were there, and they were with some other friends, family members on his side, and one of the little boys jumped in the water, started to drown. My Uncle Donnie jumped in to save him, and he did save him, but my Uncle Donnie did die. He drowned right there. That forged a bond in our family that was just profound. My parents had a pretty violent relationship. They did divorce. And so here we had my grandparents a block away, a block and a half away, my Aunt Betty with 3 babies, and my mom raising my brother and I. And those women just were amazing. And that's how it all began. My Aunt Betty went on to enlist, and in the Air Force she became a Chief Master Sergeant and served at the Pentagon. But that's a story for another day. But today's miracle moment, very simply, is the premonition of 2 mothers, Granny and Grandma, about Ronnie and Donnie, and the sadness that from the loss of so many in such a short period of time, but the bond that was forged because of family and the acknowledgement of the Holy Spirit that there's hope that we'll one day be together again. Keep your chin up, share your stories, and we'll see you tomorrow.